To our viewing audience in the future, I want to introduce Dr. Maynard K. Hine,
Thank you.
Chancellor Emeritus, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's a mouthful. That's hard to do, but at least that gives you your present title and gets us started on our interview today, Hine. This interview is a little unique in the fact that you were with us 5 years ago when we began this project, and we felt that there was so much interest in your tape and so much that there was to be said again that we invited you back. And we want to find out a little more about you previously to the tape last time and what's happened to you in the last 5 years.
I'd like to interrupt and say that I was very flattered to be asked to come back. Then I got to thinking about it and thought maybe I didn't say enough last time, and you wanted to give me another chance.
That's right. We want to give you another chance, and if this one doesn't work, the third time will be the charm. Anyway, we're glad to have you with us, and we're glad you took the time to come down. I would like to begin in your beginnings and want you to tell us a little bit about your family and immediate family and when you grew up and where you grew up, and just a brief history of the beginnings of your life.
Well, thank you. My father was a dentist practicing in a small town in central Illinois, Tuscola, Illinois, and so I guess I had ideas about dentistry pretty early. But my own family, I have 3 children. The oldest boy is a junior, Maynard K. Hine, Jr., and he's retiring this year. It's hard for me to believe that I have a son who's retiring age.
Not that old.
But he's retiring quite early. He works in Silver Spring, Maryland. He started out in research, ended up in administration. I have a daughter who's living in Bethesda. She has 2 grandsons. And then a third boy, William Hine, is a dean of continuing education at the University of Illinois in Charleston, Illinois. He has 2 grandsons too, so I have 4 grandsons, all of them between 17 and 21.
Well, that's a nice family.
Proud of all of them.
I'm sure you are, and I'm sure they're all very proud of their grandfather too, and their father, because you have every right for them to be proud. Well, you said that you're influenced probably by your dad as much as anything because he was a dentist. And where did you get started in dental school? Where did you go to school?
Well, I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana because I had a scholarship there. And then when I decided on dentistry, I went to the University of Illinois in Chicago. They have the medical center for University of Illinois in Chicago. And so I spent 4 years in Chicago. And then worked on a master's degree after that. So I finally left the University of Illinois to go into practice with my dad in Tuscola.
This was in?
It was in 1934.
Right in the middle of the Depression.
Yes. Things weren't too busy enough in that little town to take care of, for 2 people to work. So I got a scholarship at the University of Rochester, Carnegie Fellowship. And I got paid $1,700 a year for it. And then the next year I got a Carnegie Fellowship for a little raise. And so I spent 2 years in research in graduate school in University of Rochester.
What did you take your research in?
I was in microbiology. And the man that I was working with was Dr. Basil Bibby, who is well known in the dental profession, for the first year. And then he went back to New Zealand. So I took over his teaching assignments and so forth while he was in New Zealand. So I've only worked with Basil for 1 year, but we've kept in contact ever since.
How long did you stay there?
I was there for 2 years.
2 years.
Then I was offered a teaching assignment at the University of Illinois, so I went back to Chicago and taught there until 1944. I was in a department we used to call it dental therapeutics, which included periodontology, endodontics, oral pathology, preventive dentistry, and I did a little teaching also in general pathology. Jack of all trades and master of none.
Okay, you were there, and then how long were you doing that?
until 1944.
Yeah.
And then I went to Indiana University.
Indiana, that's right.
Got there in November of 1944 and as teaching histopathology and periodontology.
And keep going. You're still in Indiana. I want to bring you through up to the ladder as you're going in Indiana.
The dean at that time, Dr. William Crawford, accepted a position at Minnesota Dental School, so I was asked to become dean July 1st, 1945 at Indiana University.
After being there just 1 year?
I was there from November 1944 till July 1st, 1945 as a teacher.
That's a pretty impressive record, and then become dean.
And then, well, I guess maybe.
Well, yes, maybe. Yes, indeed it was.
Anyway, I was dean then until 1968 as dean of the dental school.
Okay, I want you to talk a little bit about your deanship and some of the things in education, student relationship, faculty, just some general things about your tenure as dean.
Well, I consider myself to be very fortunate. When I became dean, the war was just ending. We had a very small class, and there had been no students admitted to start September of 1945, so I got pretty busy pretty fast. Mm-hmm. We had, I analyzed the school and decided that we could improve it. We had a record of very fine clinical teaching. Our students were well accepted, our graduates were well accepted in the armed forces, did well in practice. The school had not made a name in research or in public service. So we got busy and things began to open up. Specialties started being developed. We opened a graduate school in the 50s so that we could train the specialists which we needed in Indiana. The people coming back from the war were eager to get into all the schools, and so the number of applicants increased tremendously, and we were able to enlarge the school and got money for research, found some very fine teachers, and we were off for pretty good things.
Kind of put the curriculum together in the 40s as a comparison in the 80s.
Well, when I went to dental school in the 20s,
okay, that's good.
I started there. We had 3 dental schools in Chicago, Northwestern Chicago College, as we called it, Loyola University, and University of Illinois. University of Illinois was recognized as being a pretty good school from the point of view of the theory. Northwestern maybe a little better. Loyola much advanced in clinical teaching. So the school was just developing pretty well, but the equipment was marginal. It was an old dental building, and the university was also on the verge of expanding too. The equipment left a lot to be desired. In our children's clinic, as we called it then, we had foot engines. We had pumped up and down, and didn't even have electric engines at the time. The curriculum had all the same courses in they have now, but the depth of the teaching was of course much more limited. When I went back and started teaching, for example, I had a course called Preventive Dentistry, 11 lectures. And I had to pad them to fill it out, and spent some time on oral microbiology and other things because we didn't do much prevention back in the 30s and 40s. But when we started in the 40s and 50s, the emphasis on prevention became apparent, and we developed the specialties. So the curriculum, while it may not have changed the names much, the content of the courses was greatly improved. Much more expansion in these basic fields. When I went to dental school in the 20s and taught in the 30s and 40s, dental materials was not mentioned much. In the 50s, we thought we should have a strong department of dental materials, and that they should be the basic dental science in all of the specialties. And so we got busy and developed a strong department of dental materials. We also needed a stronger oral pathology, I thought. So I think IU has developed a very fine department of oral pathology over the years. In fact, the textbook that is widely used throughout the world is in oral pathology. Schaefer, Hine, and Levy.
Right. I'm hoping you'd say that.
I haven't had much to do with the book lately, but it's still recognized as an outstanding textbook.
Yes, very much so. You're mentioning some of the research that you brought into Indiana, and of course the main thing that comes to mind is Crest, toothpaste, and the fluorides. But I understand there was another gentleman probably 40 years before that in Indiana that had a concept of fluoride, Dr. John Hurley, excuse me.
Looking back on the development of the fluorides in dentistry, it's interesting to note that many references were made earlier. John Hurley was a public health man, but he taught in the dental school, and he had an experiment. For example, he would take the teeth from cadavers that had caries and that didn't have, and he found that there was more fluoride in the teeth of the people that had no caries than otherwise. And so he theorized that the fluorides would be important in controlling of dental caries. He didn't publish much, but this was well recognized, well accepted in Indiana by the former students who said, "Oh yes, I remember John Hurley, and he talked about the fluorides." Well, many other people worked on fluorides. Basil Bibby contributed to it. But we had a young man in Indiana, Joe Mueller, who thought there ought to be a possibility of using fluorides actively. He started out to try to find a fluoride that would be more active than sodium fluoride. He tested many kinds of fluorides. Finally decided that stannous fluoride would be the dentifrice of choice. He looked around to find somebody that would support the research in this. Finally, he got a grant from the State Board of Health, and then one from Procter & Gamble. And they took the basic formula that Mueller and his colleagues, Day and Nebergall, had developed, patented it. Procter & Gamble took the patent, modified it so they could make it in carload lots instead of 100-pound lots, and made a lot of clinical trials, and finally it was approved by the American Dental Association, and they were off to the races. I don't want to take a lot of time talking about that, but this was one of the major developments, I think, in research and in advertising. Before Crest was approved by the American Dental Association, there would be a new dentifrice every few months, and the claims of all kinds about how effective it was and so forth. Then after a few months, something else would come along. Well, the American Dental Association set up some guidelines to approve dentifrices, and Procter & Gamble met them all, and so they finally were approved. Here again, there's a lot of tales could be told about that. The other companies wanted the approval too, and it was pretty hectic for a while. But Procter & Gamble did market it well. They are a strong company, and they very quickly became the outstanding dentifrice in the world. So one of IU's claims to fame was that they helped promote Crest, which cleaned up, as it were, the advertising claims and so forth. Other companies then followed the same guidelines and were approved. So now there are several dentifrices that are approved. But the wild claims that were made no longer exist.
Well, your longtime friend, Harold Hillenbrand, 5 years ago told a story on this very set about being in the Mideast and asking about fluoride, and he said, being out in the desert, and he said, who ever heard of a fluoride being in a camel? Ho, 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 because they drank the water from the camel's sack. I can still hear him give that regular ho, 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 you know. Yeah. So your research at Indiana was far-reaching around the world.
Harold Hillenbrand, incidentally, was quite influential, too, in developing this approval of Crest. It was, well, I was reading a report to the House of Delegates one time, and somebody in the gallery, I think motivated by one of the other competitors, said, how much did the ADA spend in approving Crest? And Harold was out of the corner of his mouth, "You don't have to answer that question." So I didn't. but it was pretty tense. But Harold was a strong supporter, and it really, well, he at one time said that was one of the major accomplishments of his career.
That's correct. That's correct. Well, I know you all were great friends. Still staying at University of Indiana, at Indiana University, let's talk a little about your physical facilities and what your students had to work with in the 40s and 50s when you were there compared to what they have now.
Well, it's easy to say that we improved in every way, really. The students were having to carry around engines, and we were able to buy enough that they would have an engine when they got to the chair rather than have to bring it to them. The equipment was very marginal. A lot of it had been moved from the old dental school downtown out, and we were able to, because of the expansion of enrollment and the addition of many strong faculty members, we were able to buy a lot of good research equipment, and the dental equipment was brought up pretty much up to date. It was a gradual affair. It didn't happen overnight, but between 1945 and 1960, we really brought the school up, I think, equipment-wise, and faculty strength to be competitive.
Well, you had a good job ahead of you when you went there, and it was kind of like creating a new school almost. And
well, when I got there, we didn't even have any students for the next year's class, freshman class.
Well, that would scare a few people nowadays, I'll guarantee you. There's always talk about faculties in universities and the relationship with their students, and some of them are very hard-nosed, and I think your faculty, following their leader, was a little different than that.
Well, I might say when I first got to Indiana, I was the only student, only faculty member, who had a degree beyond the DDS degree, and the salary scale was pretty low. We felt that we ought to get into the training of specialists, and of course they needed that additional training beyond the DDS. So we did attract some outstanding faculty members, and we gave them time to do additional study and research. And so in the 50s, we were upgrading, I thought, the faculty in many ways. Some of the fine leaders, nationally known, were developed in the 50s and 60s. This was true, of course, in other schools too, but the idea of having a doctor of philosophy, a PhD on the dental faculty, was not very common, and we thought that we should have the specialty training. So the faculty was not only increased in numbers, but also in training in the background. I think that this was done nationwide, but Indiana was in the position to take advantage of this expansion as well. Money became available for research. We got many research grants, and that gave the students an opportunity to observe firsthand research. At one time, 20% of our student body were employed in some research capacity in some of these departments, which I think was very good.
Would you make a comment on your part-time faculty?
Well, I think the part-time faculty contribute very greatly to our teaching program. I invited every specialist in the central Indiana to be on the faculty part-time, and they would contribute much to the teaching program. You know, the old saying, if you're smart, why aren't you rich? The faculty members weren't very rich, but they were running the school, committee meetings and this sort of thing. But the part-time faculty that were well respected had a good rapport with the student body, and they would listen very quickly to the part-time people. They, I think, contributed very greatly to the teaching program. We still need a basic full-time faculty, but the part-time faculty also contributed tremendously.
Well, I led you into that purposely because I'm a part-time faculty.
I happen to know that, and I'll bet you're a good one.
Well,
but it is true
I try.
that the research man, the full-time teacher, has a little different point of view about some things, and the part-time faculty member is much more apt to apply the knowledge. Tell me, you told me one time that you taught a sophomore and senior year.
We weren't going to go into this question and answer business.
Well, I'll tell you my feeling. I did the same thing.
Yes.
As a sophomore, I would teach the students oral pathology from the point of view of the microscope. They'd be interested in what they could see, and then when they got to be the fourth year, I talked about oral pathology from a clinical point of view, and they were much more interested then than the microscope. And I expect you had somewhat the same experience.
Well, we found that oftentimes as a sophomore, they're a little more receptive to teaching and want to learn a little more, but by the time they're ready to graduate, they think they've learned it all, some of them.
Well, they listen to the part-time teacher in the fourth year much more closely than they do in the second year.
It's a great place to be with young people because they keep you on your toes. And,
no doubt about that.
And it keeps you young, and it's evident. I don't see any change in 5 years. Well, we may have been powdered a little more or something like that, but we were talking about the American Dental Association, and it seems that nowadays they seem to be having more difficulty in, I don't know, not going to call recruiting, I guess it is, membership. They're trying to get more of the young men to join the American Dental Association. It's more difficult to give them a valid reason from the young men's standpoint, but you and I know that dentistry wouldn't be where it is today unless there was a mother organization or a central organization. I know you were president of the American Dental Association, and I'd like to know a little of your experiences when you were active in that phase of dentistry.
Well, I early on thought there should be a close cooperation between the educator and the organized dentistry. I was in a position to spend some time in organized dentistry, trying to be sure that I understood their problems as well as have them understand the problems in dental education. I think that there should be no conflicts. There could be a difference of opinion periodically. We don't have to always agree on everything, but there shouldn't be any opposition, and that sometimes that did develop. I think that organized dentistry has to be the spokesman for dental problems, and should also support dental education. So I thought it was a two-way street. I was in a position to work in organized dentistry. I was president of the Indianapolis Dental Society, then the state, then the national, and then finally the International Dental Organization, because I was in a position to be able to spend time in that regard. But I thought that was important. And I also was active, as you know, in the Association of Dental Schools and the International Association for Dental Research. I one time testified before Congress on a matter, and I spoke for both Association of Dental Schools and the American Dental Association. And one of the congressmen said, when will the medical profession get around to speaking like that? And I said, ask the medical profession, don't ask me. But there has been some conflict in recent years developed between organized dentistry and the dental schools. Probably partly misunderstanding or a lack of a knowledge on the two, but I hate to see that develop. I think that we're all working to help the dental health of the public, and we ought to work together.
What year were you president of the ADA?
I was elected in 1964. That's a long time ago.
What was your remuneration during your year of presidency?
Well, I got a pretty good expense account, but I had no honorarium at all.
No honorarium.
I thought I was glad to make the contribution if I could without it being paid or anything like that. So I must say that I have had a good many offices, but I never actually campaigned for any of them. Well, one exception. I had no opposition when I ran with ADA, and I was pleased about that because it meant that at least I had the confidence of both educators and the organized.
You didn't go out and spend $50,000.
I sure didn't
job.
have it, or I didn't, or I wouldn't have spent it if I had. Better ways to use your money than that.
Yeah, it's a little different nowadays.
Actually, it is, and even the trustees and the candidates recognize that. There have been several attempts to limit the amount of expenditure that a president can spend. But it's always after they've elected that they start talking about that. It is a problem. There's no doubt about that. And sometimes some enemies are made, and sometimes it's, well, I just hate to see this kind of competition develop the way it is.
And we were talking about your presidencies and your offices held and different things. I noticed you're wearing a very beautiful pin in your lapel. It's a little different than mine. And
yes, I started the organization in 1944. I'd like to talk a little bit about the American Fund for Dental Health. It was the American Fund for Dental Education when I started it. I was president of the Association of Dental Schools in the mid-50s and made the recommendation that we should start a fund in order to give money to the Association of Dental Schools to carry on programs. Before that time, most of it came from the American Dental Association. Well, my report was approved, and the next president immediately appointed me chairman of a committee. So we did organize this fund. It's designed to raise money for the development of, at that time, dental education. And we got a small grant from the Wrigley Company, then a larger grant from Dent Supply, and hired, we started the organization in Indiana because that was easy to do with the School of Law. We legally got approved. Then as soon as it got approved and got a tax-exempt privilege from the government, my faculty resigned and we had nationwide. And over the years, this has developed to be quite a help to dental education and to dental health. In the 60s, it was decided to broaden the scope of the association, and now they collect a lot of money from dental manufacturers, dental dealers, from toothpaste manufacturers, from the dentists themselves, from the dental hygienists. It's quite a broad program, and then they use this money to promote research in teaching and in health. It's the only foundation that has a sole purpose to help dentistry.
And you're very proud of the organization.
It's one thing that I was able to get started. I just happened to be at the right time, at the right place, and things worked out all right.
In retrospect, we kind of passed by your early beginnings. Was there any particularly one thing that, let's say other than your father, that prompted you to study dentistry?
Well, I don't know. When I was in high school, people would ask me what I'm going to do, and I said, well, there were two things that I was not going to do. I was not going to be a dentist, and I was not going to be a teacher. I ended up being both. Actually, my father was influential, not directly. He didn't say, why don't you study dentistry? But I appreciated his style of life. He was independent. He was in a small town, but he was active in many community affairs. He was chairman of the board that built the first hospital in the state, chairman of the board that built the high school and so forth. He made quite a contribution in the community as well as in dental health. And that appealed to me. That's one reason I think when I got later on, I got into community affairs and into organized dentistry as well as education. I thought that it was a good living. I knew that he wasn't going to drive Cadillacs around, but that didn't bother me any. And so I think it was probably the style of life that my father had that encouraged me to go in, rather than him saying, why don't you be a dentist? I also enjoyed a little later on, I could see the amount of science involved, and I was interested in science. And the application, I like to work with people. And I could have gone into medical school. I had the grades for it, pre-dental grades, but dentistry appealed to me more.
Well, I've always been proud to be a dentist, and it's a very rewarding profession. We've talked about this before, but we'll not get into that. Of course, we did mention that just now that your father was an influence, but as you were going along in your dental career, I know that you had other people that were influential in guiding you and helping you, and you might want to mention a few of those.
Well, of course, I did have some very fine mentors or people that I looked up to. One of them was a Presbyterian minister in Tuscola, Reverend Batchelor. I considered the ministry for a while, but I guess I didn't get the call. So anyway, I turned it down. But he got me involved in youth presbytery, the synod for Central Illinois, and it was my first contact in administration. And so I enjoyed that, and decided later on that I had some experience in that field. When I got into dental school, J. Roy Blaney comes to mind. He was a oral pathologist, a scientist. He would take a microscope and slides home, and he didn't have to do that, but he loved to do it. Isaac Schauer, who later became dean at Illinois, when I was a sophomore, employed me as a student assistant. Paid me 50 cents an hour, as a matter of fact. And I did some work as a junior instructor. This isn't very important, but I was also student assistant in endodontics. And you remember Joe Bonnier? Mm-hmm. Joe Bonnier was finally general. He was a class behind me, so I used to tell people that he was my student.
There you are.
He didn't appreciate that really, but technically it was true. I almost went into the Army, as a matter of fact, and I've often wondered what would have happened if I decided to beat Joe Bonnier. I'd have been 1 year ahead of him, you see.
You'd have probably been the general.
Well, I don't know. I might have been fired too, discharged. But anyway, I think that Schauer was and Blaney were the two teachers that influenced me most.
Well, there's and in your faculty when you were at school, I know there are people. Of course, the only one I really know personally is Ralph Phillips, and but you had some very fine men there that...
Yes, I was able to get some fine people. I was lucky. A lot of people that I did call in didn't do too well, but my philosophy about the people like Ralph Phillips and Bill Schaefer and Dave Mitchell and those people was stay out of their way. Mm-hmm. I gave them a laboratory, all the equipment I could find, and pointed the direction maybe and let them go. They accused me of being a dictator, but I said, well, I hope it was benevolent dictator. But for example, Ralph Phillips got the Chicago Dental Society Research Prize, which is quite a prestigious award, and he came in and said, what do you think of that? And I said, well, a lot of people have got that, but nobody's ever got it twice. Yeah. Well, about 5 years later, he came in and threw it down. What do you think of that? And then there was a well-respected practitioner in Indianapolis named John F. Johnston. He was hard-nosed, kind of a rascal in many ways, and I convinced him to come out to school. And students loved him and hated him. Some people that didn't want to work too hard thought that he was a terrible task driver. But the John F. Johnston Study Club that they have now, last time I went to one of their meetings, there were 75 people from all over the world that came in to pay respect to Johnny Johnson. All I did was tell him that what I thought we wanted from him, and he did it, and I had nothing else to do with it. There again, I said to Johnny, you won't be the most popular teacher around, but the school does need the discipline that you'll bring. Well, about 5 years later, he got the award for the best teacher in the class. I had to eat my words.
That's great. That's great.
But I did try to encourage the faculty to publish, to do research, but I didn't insist that they do it. We had some people that were straight clinicians, people like Drex Boyd, Fred Holt, and some of those people that were very fine clinical teachers that never published much or were much interested in research. A school ought to be balanced, in my opinion. We ought to have research. We need publications. We need good clinicians as well.
And when did you retire as the dean of the dental?
Well, I had been dean for a long time, and I was realizing that maybe it's time to step out when I was offered the chancellorship of IUPUI. There's a long history there that isn't pertinent to the situation.
Very much pertinent because it's about Maynard Hine.
Well, I was thinking of the International College. Which,
No, we're talking about Maynard Hine.
But anyway, over the years, the Indiana University at Bloomington had given some continuing education courses in Indianapolis. Purdue had been giving some courses also from Lafayette. And they were getting larger every year until there was a little competition developing between the two, a little duplication. Then there were several of the city fathers that thought there ought to be an Indianapolis University. The legislature was asked to pass a bill creating a separate independent university. Well, this was unrealistic in many ways because to start a university from scratch with both Lafayette and Bloomington universities so close by, that they finally decided to merge IU and Purdue into IUPUI, and I was asked to be the first chancellor. Unusual appointment because I was, at that time, I had 4 years from mandatory retirement. But the people that were on the committee, I guess, needed somebody that knew Indianapolis, knew the programs, could get along well with people, and wouldn't try to build an empire. So what I did, and also they didn't have a lot to offer an outsider. No office, no budget, no library, coordinated library, no faculty council, didn't have even a filing cabinet or anything to put in it. So my job in the 4 years that I was given, actually they extended that a little beyond the legal amounts while they were trying to find my successor, was to pull people together. So we created the faculty council, the student council for all groups, and we got people coordinated, worked together. Very interesting period. I was kind of busy. My life was threatened once. They obviously didn't follow through, but we had student unrest some in that time, in the late 60s and early 70s. Placard carrying, and we had some students that wanted no commencement, and others went through commencement barefooted and so forth. But basically things got along pretty well, and we got off to a good start, and so that was my escape from deanship. I escaped upstairs to be a chancellor.
You shouldn't have done such a good job at the dental school. So you walked into that and had to build, and they heard about that, so they brought you over to put
actually, I was lucky to be at the right time at the right place. Chancellor was not a term well recognized in Indiana. So I looked it up, and I like to tell the story. A chancellor, by definition, is a keeper of the exchequer and guardian for the imbeciles and idiots of the community. Well, that's one of the definitions. So I used to say, now, the faculty and the students and the staff, idiots, imbeciles, and not. But I didn't follow that.
No.
But the chancellor is a term that has to be defined. In some places, chancellor is above the president, others the chancellor is below it. In Indiana, the chancellor reports to the president of the university. So I was chancellor of all the Indianapolis units, medicine, dentistry, law, and nursing. There are 14 of them altogether. And then I reported to the president of the university.
And in the beginning of this consolidation, how many was your student enrollment?
The student body was about 14,000 then.
That's a pretty good size.
Varies a little bit, but it's now 26,000.
That's even better.
And it's grown very well, which means there was a need for it. The story of the area is fascinating, but too long to give at this time. Except when I got there, it was surrounded by slums, one of the worst slum districts in the country. In 1944. Now, that's all been cleared out and fine buildings. We have a beautiful campus now that has developed in the last 20 years.
Very similar to the campus here in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, it's an urban university.
Spread out, some very beautiful.
Yeah, I was pleased to see it when we came in this morning.
Well, we've gone through your presidencies, and some of your organizational work. Is there anything else along that line that you think of that you'd like to mention?
Well, of course, there's a lot of stories, a lot of things that have happened and so forth.
If you have a good one, well, tell us.
Well, I was just thinking, when I was dean of the dental school, I was the fifth dentist, fifth dean since 1879 when the school started. Since I left in 1969 to become IUPUI, I left in December of '68. 1969, we've had two deans, and that's the general tenure of deans has been much shorter. I think that's not all bad, but the deanship has changed a lot now. When I was dean, I was expected to run the school. Now, the dean has to work with students, with faculty, with staff, with the community, with the university, and all of these people want a part of the action. It is much more complicated. And a dean has to be a fundraiser. If you get money, you give it to somebody else. If you don't get the money, nothing happens. If you do get the money and you give to them and they don't do anything, nothing happens. It's a frustrating kind of a situation. Middleman sort of thing. And I know of at least two deans that resigned because they couldn't get the money that they needed, they thought, to carry out their program. The change has been dramatic. And I think I was in the right time.
Well, I've heard you mention about the golden years in dentistry, and I think probably you were in education and teaching in those years as the practitioner was in private practice during those years.
Actually, there's no doubt but what the expansion in all aspects of dentistry occurred after World War II for many reasons. And I was in a position just to ride with the crest and point the directions I wanted to go, and then if they did it, that'd be fine. I was lucky.
I've heard you talk about those good times, and then when things begin to level off, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about when. Let's talk about the economic part of dentistry. Everything was going so well, and then things slowed down. That your concept of that's very interesting.
Well, actually, I was quite disturbed. Things were going very well in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and early 70s. But many things happened. The expectations of the dentists had been built up so that if they didn't have the Cadillac and the second home, after 5 years they were unhappy. They expected that they would open an office and step aside for the rush coming in. It is an expansion. The public appreciation for dentistry was improved. Greater demands for it, greater ability of many of the people to buy dentistry and so forth. But in the 80s, there began to be a shadow develop, and people lost rapid expansion, and dentistry the applications dropped down. Dentistry became a little less popular in the eyes of the young people, and so we had a lot of problems that resulted in a lowering of the popularity of dental education and dentistry. At the same time, the specialists were being developed, and newer techniques, newer materials were developed so that the dentist was in a position to give better service. The fluorides cut down on the amount of dental decay, and so that didn't have as many toothaches to treat. The children, many of them didn't have to go to the dentist. There was a leveling off of things in the late 70s and 80s. And so if you want to call that the golden era, it did become diluted a little bit, and it now has settled back, I think. The income of the dentist is gradually increasing. The demand for dentistry is gradually increasing again, and the application rate, as I understand it, this fall is up again a little bit more. Still below what it was, but many dental schools, as you know, had to close, and practically all of them reduced enrollment. and that has put a crimp a little bit in the development of research and the teaching programs, because without the volume of students coming in, it's been a leveling off of this rapid expansion that occurred in the 50s and 60s. It resulted in some concerns that I have about the future. Do you want to talk about that a minute?
Well, that's before we get to that. While we're on the school and education, it was an interesting thing that we talked about a while ago. The cost when your father went to school. You were talking. You had some notes in your pocket there, and I wanted you to bring those out.
Well,
cost when you went to school, and the cost a few years back, and the cost now as a comparative figure.
Actually, when my dad went to school in Indiana in 1904, his tuition was, I think, $25 for a year. When I went to school, it was appreciably more than that, and when you went to school, it was a little more than that, but not compared to what it is now. I did pick up some figures that I thought were quite interesting. The cost of dentistry in general is a concern of mine. The cost of treatment, the cost of dental education to the university and to the student. In 1981, the figures that I got from the American Association of Dental Schools, entering dental school, the average debt was $1,600. And in 1989, it was $3,900. That to get into dental school. After they got out of school, graduation, the average debt that the students had in 1981 was $17,900. The average debt in 1989 was $32,000. And that's in the public schools. In the private schools, the average debt in 1981 was $29,800. And in 1989, the last time figures were available, $60,900. Now, some of them, the students, had debts of over $100,000. I'm on a committee that selects students for one of the student aid programs that we have, and I was alarmed just a couple months ago to find that some of our senior students have debts while they're while they're still in dental school of over $50,000. One of the changes that has occurred in the general public, I think, is the willingness or the going in debt. Now, this is before they start practice, and when they get out in practice, they have to buy equipment or something, and it presents a serious problem. The student who leaves with a debt of, shall we say, the average debt of $32,000 has to buy, if he's going to solo practice, a lot of equipment. Immediately, he has to pay interest on his loans, interest on his equipment, as well as a down payment, or the paying on the principal. He has to accept patients that he might not otherwise. He has to charge more than he might otherwise, and you can't blame him. He has malpractice insurance and so forth. I'm alarmed at some of the fees that the public has to pay, but I can't blame the dentist because of the problems that have gone. So one of the concerns that I have about dentistry is the cost of dental education to the university. They have to pay greater salaries for faculty members, and equipment that the dental school costs more, cost to the student, and cost to the public. There's no easy answer.
No, there certainly isn't. And of course, the public schools are supported by the taxpayer and pay a big portion of the student's education. Even what he pays doesn't cover it all.
That's right. The fees that the student pays is an important part, but it's only about a third of the total budget of the dental school.
So
that's one of the questions I was going to ask you to answer. What are we going to do about this concern of ours?
Well, now you're far more knowledgeable in things of that nature than I am.
There's no easy answer.
I'm just a young fellow in this business. I've only been around 40 years. But it is a problem, and do you think that this particular problem has any direct correlation with ethics?
Well, I'm afraid I'll have to say yes. I can't blame a student. Well, may I give you a little background?
Okay.
when I was at Illinois, we had a research experiment going on. We took a group of children and we wanted to see how much caries they would develop. So 3 of us would examine one of these children, all 3 of us, every child. And we'd come to a place where Eddie Walk would say, "Now that's a cavity I'll fill." Then the second administrator said, "No, that doesn't. That's just a deep fissure. There's no caries there." And I was in between, apparently, about half the time. The point I'm making is that there has to be some discretion as to some kinds of dentistry. Now, if I have a debt of $32,000 and interest to pay on that, and interest to pay on my equipment, and I put an Explorer in the tooth and decide, now, do I have to put a filling in there or not? Ethics begins to raise its head a little bit. I'm glad to say that most dentists recognize that they have to watch the quality. They have to watch these things. There are very few complaints from patients, but I have to say also that there are some people that are tempted sometimes to charge a little more, do a little more than is absolutely necessary. I had a patient come in when I was dean years ago, said he wanted to talk to me about a problem. He had gone to a local dentist who was going to charge a pretty good fee. He came out to dental school because he didn't want to pay that, and the fee was a lot less, of course. But he said, "You're missing something out here. You're not teaching." I said, "How could there be such a great discrepancy between the two?" And I said, "Well, you remember this, that there are 3 ways to go to the post office. You can go by bicycle, you can go by Cadillac, or you can walk. Now, we teach here to take care of disease. We don't want any patient to leave that has any disease control. But there are many times things that could be done that might be preventive, that might help in the future. Who's right and who's wrong?" And so the point I'm making is that sometimes the man's ethics determines whether he wants to go into one way or the other to get to the post office.
I want to continue this discussion on ethics and bring in a little of the advertising, but right now we're going to have a little break, Hine, and give you a chance to have another little sip of water.
Did you ever hear the story? This is off the record, of course.
Hine, on our first portion of this interview, we were talking about ethics, and I want to continue on with that theme and bring up the ethical situation in the profession and probably touch on advertising and some of the things that have happened to us since the great Supreme Court has ruled.
Well, I've been unhappy to see the amount of advertising that has developed since the edict was made that we allow people to advertise. If they would only call it public dental health education, I'd feel better about it. But the idea of advertising tends to lead over into the field of marketing and in promoting sales and so forth. And I hate to see that happen. I think that back in the 1860s, it was a common practice for the man to advertise because he had to let people know that he was going to be in the city and that he could do certain things. But as dentistry developed and became more established in the minds of the public, it seemed to me unnecessary to advertise in the way that it's being done at the moment. Just an announcement with a calling card type of statement, no objection to that, of course. But some of the advertising that I see in the telephone directories and in the papers, it seems to me it weakens the status of the professions. I agree I'm old-fashioned, but I still don't like to see people following like the ambulance trace chasers, trying to create the impression that they're better than other people and cheaper than other people, and it just seems to me that not be correct.
Well, you know, now they don't call it advertising; they call it marketing, as you mentioned. Yeah. And there's a lot of men on the speaking circuit and women that have these courses that you can pay $300 or $400 to and learn ethical marketing. which to me seems at terms at odds with each other. I'm like you.
I just feel it weakens the status of the profession to have to go out and market the product that they're selling instead of talking about the service. It's popular. Many of the dental meetings are built around the idea of marketing your product,
Yes.
your service, I mean. And I think it's a step backward.
One of our past presidents is very popular in it.
And making a lot of money out of it, too.
Marketing very well.
That's right. He's marketing. That's for sure.
I know that one of your, I guess you would call it a hobby or an avocation. I don't know how you classify your intense interest in history. You didn't wind up teaching it, but you certainly are a historian. And what kind of got you started in the aspects of running down things historical? And
oh, that's a little hard to answer, I guess. I write a column in the State Dental Journal called Hindsight.
mm-hmm.
And my secret agenda in that is to remind people that the old-timers were sometimes pretty smart. And I started reading the older journals, and I found many things in it that I quote in this Hindsight that I write. Basically, I just find it's interesting to know something about how things develop, and I get a charge out of reading old books.
I know when you were here 5 years ago, you mentioned in the latter part of your interview of some of the problems that were surfacing with amalgam and the mercury in amalgam, and you went back to 1840 and was mentioning the amalgam war then. Did you ever write that article that you said you were going to write?
I finally did. One reason I did it was to point out that the amalgam war resulted in the formation of the American Dental Association. They had a national organization before that, and they finally passed the rule that anybody that used amalgam could not be a member. Well, this angered a lot of people. They didn't want organized dentistry to tell them how to practice. Mm-hmm. And even some of the good dentists that wouldn't use amalgam as it was used at that time were critical because they didn't want the organization to dictate too much to practice. So I did write the article. Incidentally, the trouble with amalgam back in those times was the people that were promoting it didn't bother to prepare cavities well. They wouldn't get all the decay. They had to stick in some amalgam, and of course it wouldn't last very long. It led to shoddy dentistry, in other words, using amalgam. And that's why the national organization was opposing it. But it was a rather interesting twist that even the good dentists didn't want to have somebody else tell them how to practice. And so that's why I wrote the article.
That's kind of human nature. We don't like to have people tell us.
No, that's better ways to do it than that.
And along these historical lines, and I know you've been an investigative reporter, I heard that you're quite an authority on Lincoln and Lincoln's teeth. And we'd like another little story on that.
Actually, many years ago, I was asked to make a speech in Cleveland on Abraham Lincoln's birthday. So I thought it might be worthwhile to mention that something about his teeth. We knew a lot about Washington's teeth. Books and articles have been written about that, but nothing about Lincoln. So I did a little checking, and then I got interested and did a little more, and I think I've now exhausted the literature and the leads that I can find about Abraham Lincoln's teeth. And I've been bold enough to say that I am the world's authority on Abraham Lincoln's teeth, because nobody knows much about them.
Can't be challenged.
They can't be challenged. Actually, he had at least 4 visits to a dentist that had been authenticated. Maybe had others, but his dentist in Springfield, a fellow named Dr. French, didn't keep any records of people that paid their bills, and Abraham Lincoln always paid his bill. But French did take care of the Lincoln family. So he may have had more problems than we know. But the question arises as to why Lincoln didn't have more dental problems. Washington did. And so I went back and found that, of course, we knew he was born in southern Indiana and Kentucky, born and raised there early life. Spring water has fluoride in it. And the amount of fluoride depends upon the rainfall. So I checked the rainfall in those years, and it was scanty. So he might have had a fluoride in his drinking water. He also knew something about oral health. He bought a toothbrush in 1842, and his wife in 1862 signed a testimonial for a dentifrice, which was commonly done at that time. He did have a tooth extracted in central Illinois, or partly extracted, and they had trouble. So he had to go to Louisville, have it all taken out. Then the fourth visit that has been recorded was an interesting one. In 1862, he was in Washington and had a toothache. So he went to the dentist there. This has been reported in the dental journals. And the dentist said he had to take the tooth out. So Lincoln said, wait a minute. And he held up his hand, and he took out of his pocket a vial, and he whiffed that for a while, and then he made a motion, and the dentist took out the tooth, and he reported that the tooth was taken out without pain. Well, the vial contained chloroform. Well, chloroform at that time was known as a general anesthetic. It had been used medicine for a while. Question arises where he got the chloroform, and was he a chloroform sniffer, so forth. But apparently this was an isolated case, but he might have gotten the chloroform from the Surgeon General in Washington, because he did know that chloroform would be a general anesthetic. I 2 or 3 times have attempted to said, is Abraham Lincoln a chloroform, or was he a chloroform sniffer? Was Abraham Lincoln a chloroform sniffer? But I thought maybe I better not.
Well, that way we could get a little national publicity.
It might be a little more sensational.
Wasn't there someone, a friend of yours or someone you had an acquaintance with that suggested you have Abraham Lincoln's body exhumed?
A good friend of mine, Radar Sognes, who was dean of the Southern California Dental School for a while, made a great study of George Washington's teeth. He actually duplicated one of the dentures that Washington wore. And he told me one day, he said, why don't you have Abraham Lincoln exhumed and examine his teeth? Well, I thought that was going a little too far. But I did check the autopsy report. He was killed by a bullet that went in that general direction through his head. No mention of his teeth. Nowhere have I been able to find a good description of Abraham Lincoln's teeth. So as I said earlier, I'm an authority, but not on much.
You could really be an authority if you could get a look at those, couldn't you?
Yes. Frankly, I would enjoy it, but I don't think that.
I don't think
that's going too far.
Oh my! Do you classify your historical interest as a hobby?
Oh, I think it would have to be that. It's a labor of love. There's no income from it or anything like that. I am listed as an archivist for the dental school, so I do collect records and try to keep things like that. But it's a hobby.
Good. Also understand you're a gourmet cook.
Well, I talk a better game than I play in that regard, but I do enjoy cooking. Even when my wife was living, I would cook, if we have a groupie, and I'd cook the entree. In the morning, I'd always cook breakfast while she got the kids ready for school. So that's a hobby.
That's good. And you have a few other hobbies, don't you?
Well, I've said many times that I ought to be a full-time retiree. I still go to the dental school about every day on some assignments and so forth. But I collect stamps. I used to be a philatelist. Now I'm a stamp saver. I've been waiting for that heart attack, so I'll have a long recovery period so I can work on some of my hobbies.
Oh, no, you don't want to have that.
No luck at all.
No, let's don't do that.
No luck.
Not at all. Well, back to the more serious part of our conversation, Hine. As you know, there's getting to be more and more third-party interference or third-party participation in our profession, not only the insurance companies but the government, and particularly since the outcry and the hue and all of the talk about hepatitis and AIDS, the things that have come along. I'd like to hear some of your feelings on that and comments.
Well, this is a complicated problem. We're all of us, of course, alarmed at the spread of AIDS and hepatitis. We recognize that the dentist is at a point of risk in many cases. On the other hand, I hate to see we overreact. Some of the rules that they've established, OSHA, the government, it takes a lot of time. And the dentist has to drape the units and cover the hand pieces and all this sort of thing. I'm hopeful that the dentist will use extreme discretion, but not under such rigid controls that it interferes with practice. It makes the fee of the dentist have to go up and this sort of thing. It's alarming, the rate of growth, however, that is occurring in AIDS and hepatitis. Mm-hmm. And if a dentist is careless, he's in serious trouble. There's been a case reported recently of a dentist giving a patient AIDS, but that has not been validated. And the people I've talked to in public health feel that the case has to be studied much more thoroughly, the background of the patients before they can accuse the dentist.
I'll hear it again. It's sensationalism sometimes for the newspapers, and if they got wind of Lincoln sniffing the chloroform, you know what it would have been on the front page.
Yeah,
so,
but I don't want to underestimate the importance of careful caution.
No, I think, well, particularly with hepatitis now, of course, we do have one vaccine to help one strain of that, but somebody quoted, I don't know where it was, you're 5 times more likely to get struck by lightning than you are to get AIDS if you're careful.
Yeah,
if
that's
you're
right.
careful. We were talking just before this about along the lines of this health and the era of the beginning of the penicillin, and your role in that connected with Indiana.
Well, of course, the history of penicillin is pretty well known. When I was a graduate student in Rochester, I carried on an experiment to test the ability of saliva to inhibit bacteria. The technique was to seed a petri dish, a plate with bacteria, put a little well in it, and then put in saliva and see the zone of inhibition that would go around, meaning that the saliva had killed some bacteria. Well, in the course of this experiment, occasionally a mole would get in, and around the mole sometimes would be a ring of no growth, inhibition of the bacteria in the petri dish. Well, if I'd have studied that zone, that's what the way penicillin was found. And this was before penicillin was used at all. I was too dumb to do that because I was contaminated place, so I threw it away. but Fleming from England had worked on this and finally developed it. And in the mid and late 40s, penicillin became available in this country for treatment on a very limited scale. It was effective, and people realized that in certain conditions, if a person got penicillin, they'd get well. If he didn't get penicillin, he would not get well. So they appointed a committee to study how to distribute penicillin in a way that would be equitable and justifiable. And I was asked to represent dentistry on that committee. Mm-hmm. I went into Washington, and we sat around one morning, Alan Gregg from the medical group and some others, and tried to figure out how to distribute the available penicillin. About 11 o'clock, 11:30, the staff man who was assigned to it said, "Why don't you people go out to lunch and I'll write up the report. I think I've got the ideas that you present." I had the feeling, confidentially, that he had the report in his pocket. But anyway, we did that and came back and did establish guidelines that were effective for a few years in controlling the distribution of penicillin. Of course, as the research expanded and they were able to develop penicillin more rapidly, the committee went out of existence very quickly. But it was trying times because we were saying that give it this way so you can get well, but you can't, and that's not an easy decision to make.
That's very difficult.
We're running into the same thing, incidentally, in other situations now, which brings up the problem of ethics, which we may want to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Right ahead. Continue.
Well, for example, medical science has developed methods of transplanting and implanting all kinds of tissues and so forth. develop better techniques at the CAT scan and better methods, better therapeutic agents. The only trouble is they're costly, and there's limited supply. So the question arises, if you have 3 patients in the hospital all needing a kidney transplant, but only 1 kidney, who's going to decide what person gets the kidney? It's an ethical problem, not a medical problem. The medics can handle it. But we have the same thing in dentistry in many cases. We have, well, the implants now. That's pretty well developed science now. It's going to be quite successful in the proper place, very costly. Some patients come in that desperately need it. People with no lower ridge, for example, that can't wear dentures at all. Sometimes they can't have a transplant, but sometimes they can. But the decision of what patient gets what kind of treatment and who's going to pay for it is really a serious problem. Some of these things lead to exploitation, too. Remember a few years ago it was common to talk about full mouth reconstruction, rehabilitation they called it. Many times very helpful, very costly. Do we give it to the people, only the people that can pay for it? Well, who else is going to pay for it? But this is an ethical problem, and it is something that is attracting more and more attention, and it's going to be it's going to take us very thoughtful people to come up with guidelines that are really equitable in medicine and dentistry.
Well, along that lines, it's most of these things are specialties. What's your feeling about the tremendous emphasis on specialties in dentistry today?
Well, when again, I'll go back a little bit. When I came into Indiana, we had very few orthodontists, for example, a few oral surgeons. That's about all the specialties we had. And as the science of dentistry developed, it became apparent that we needed more specialties. So we did, the ADA, as you know, finally accepted 8. And the graduate schools were formed to train these specialists. The specialists were being extra trained and requiring extra skills. The fees went up. It became popular for the students. Now, the last few years, about 30% of our students go into the graduate school so they can become specialists of one kind or another. I'm afraid it's being overdone a little bit. I think that the increase in the number of specialists was necessary in the 50s. I think it may have gone a little too far, but the fact that we have so many more orthodontists in Indiana now and throughout the country doesn't lower the price any. The price has stayed up very well. It's very lucrative to have a specialty practice, very popular with the dental students. But somewhere along the line, I think we're going to have to do some reevaluation. Now, how are we going to do it? That's your question. You have to answer that.
Well, we'll meet in about 5 years and we'll discuss the answer on that one.
Well, speaking seriously, I know specialists are important. They've contributed to the literature, the research, the better understanding. Really, a lot of it come from the specialties. But somewhere along the line, there has to be some consideration of making the advances that we all have more applicable to the public. And that's no easy problem. No,
it's the public that gets to foot the bill on all things.
I'm afraid so.
And it sometimes gets a little overburdening. What would you say to a mother and father that if they came to you, should my son or daughter go into dentistry? What do you think?
I can answer that quickly. My grandson is going into dentistry, and I haven't said one word to discourage him. Wow. I will admit, however, that I haven't encouraged him unduly. Dentistry is still a fine profession. I'm still high on its value. The public appreciates it. It's very important. But there are some concerns that I have about dentistry, and it's changing. We'll have a good profession in the future, but it will be different than it was in the 30s and 40s and 50s. Different in emphasis. There's more work on prevention in the dental office, less probably on dental caries, replacement of, removal of caries and putting in fillings, at least in the children, and more cosmetic dentistry, more orthodontics in adults. It's going to be a different kind of a program. But I still think it's a fine profession. We need dentists, and I think that, as I say, I'm putting no blocks in the way of my grandson to study dentistry. I would answer that. In other words, if somebody comes to me and says about it, I would explain to them that.
Do you see less activity at the chair side for the dentist, and put him more in a role of the diagnostician and the overall, what do I want to say, set up the program and with more auxiliary and ancillary personnel doing some of the actual work? Do you see that in the future of dentistry?
One of the concerns I have in dentistry is the handling within the profession of the auxiliaries. There are, as you well know, some conflicts between the hygienists and the dental assistants and the dentist. I think that the logical solution will be the dentist in control, but using the auxiliaries more than they did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I see no reason why some of the reversible activities such as prophylaxis and so forth could be done by a less well-trained dentist. I mean, individual. It doesn't have to be a dentist to polish teeth or even polish restorations. And if that will save the dentist time and bring down the price to the public, I think it'll be all right. Trouble is the control. Some people might have one dentist and 20 assistants and push their limits, and that would not be good for the public's health. But I really believe that the well-trained dentist will spend increasingly amount of time in diagnosis and outline of treatment, and then subdivide some of the simpler things to somebody else. How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm kind of in accord with there, and with some of the things that are coming in, such as the computerized crown we've talked about.
Yeah.
That seems unreal, fantastic, almost fantasy land, but it is actually being done.
Yeah, again, it's very costly.
Very costly.
It may come down as they get broader, but as they get into that field, the dentist can go so far, and then he can have an assistant come in and punch the buttons.
Right, that's right.
So dentistry will be different.
Very much so.
But it is progressive.
A little more discussion and conversation about the future of dentistry and what you think might be coming along, and the role of government and the role of insurance in our future.
Well, I'd much rather talk about the future than the past, and we have been talking about the past quite a lot today. I think the future is bright, but one of the concerns that I have is the controls that seem to be developing from outside agencies. The government, since dental health is important to the public, it's conceivable that the government should play some roles and so forth, but I hate to get them in charge of controlling the dental profession too much. I didn't like their advertising rule, for example, their leniency that they developed there. Another concern that I've had is the rapid development of dental insurance. It's being welcomed by many dentists in many ways, and it is helpful to the public. But the insurance companies seem to be placing themselves in an area that is controlling more than I think. They shouldn't have to say dentists should do this but not do that. It's too strictly. And I think that we'd have to accept the good part of it but try to control it if it goes too far. I'm in other words, of the opinion that the dentist should be the one who decides what should be done for the patient and how it should be done, rather than have some outside agency saying that you shouldn't do that, and you must extract instead of treat or whatever. And that tends to be the trend that I see.
It's happening to us.
And I repeat, I think dentistry's future is bright, but I think we must have a strong central organization in order to help fight the dental battles. And we need organizations also like the International College of Dentists. We haven't talked much about that this morning, but it's developed in the last 25 years to a very valuable part of the dental profession. and holding up high standards and promoting the ethics in every way that they can. I applaud them for their programs.
And we thank you for it, and we thank you for coming to Oklahoma again and spending a couple of days with us. It's really been our pleasure to have you, and I know that you'll be looking forward to seeing a copy of this tape.
I'm not sure about that.
I am. Hine, thank you so much.
So thank you very much for letting me come down.
Our pleasure.
Thanks very much.